The person we're going to talk about today is, if you're an Unsolved Mysteries fan, a case that you're probably familiar with. A beloved husband and father goes out on a typical weekend to do something that he has done many times before. But on this weekend, things would take a horrible turn. It is over 40 years later, and we're still trying to figure out why. Let's talk about Permon Gilbert. Before we get into this story, there are a few things that I wanted to mention. There really wasn't a lot out there about this case. There is, of course, the Unsolved Mysteries segment and a decent amount of newspaper articles from around the time of this mystery and for a few years after, so that is the main source that I'll be using to tell the story. Of course, I always want to put out the most accurate information, and sometimes when trying to find that with cold cases, you have to think outside of the box. My friend Clinton, who has helped me greatly with the research in this case, had a great idea. He created a Facebook page titled Permon Gilbert, What Happened to Me in 1982, in hopes to get more information on this case and speak with people in the Hamersville area that might have information. The page is growing very quickly and we monitor it daily. We've already got some helpful information from people, and we believe that it will continue to be a great resource now and in the future if anyone has any relevant information on the murder of Permon Gilbert. Anyone on there can message us privately, and their name will not be revealed. Oftentimes, it is after I publish an article or podcast that someone contacts me with new information. If that does happen, or if we learn anything new, then we will update the case with a follow-up episode. We did reach out to some of Permon's family members and friends, but they did not wish to speak with us. I'm not sure exactly why, but this is no doubt a painful chapter of their life that they may not wish to relive, and I totally understand that. Permon Jean Gilbert was one of 5 children born on July 23, 1935, in Bethel, Ohio, to Giles and Louise Gilbert. His siblings were Betty, Charlotte, Donald, and Vernon. Permon would marry Joanne Schneider on December 26, 1953, and the couple would go on to have 4 children: Permon Jr., Joni, Gina, and Jennifer. Unfortunately, Permon's mother, Louise Gilbert, would die on November 30th, 1960, at only 45 years of age. She was riding in a car driven by her father when, after letting a hitchhiker out, he mistakenly pulled out in front of a semi on US 52 near Ripley. Sadly, Louise, along with her sister and brother-in-law, would all perish in the horrific crash. Around 1967, the young Gilbert family moved to Hamersville, Ohio. In 1982, they lived outside of Hamersville on a farm at 10866 Ohio 774. As a hobby, Permon liked to fly a plane that he co-owned that he kept in a hangar on his property. Permon Gilbert worked as an appliance technician for a General Electric repair office out of Cincinnati. Permon was well liked, and his co-workers would refer to him by his middle name of Gene. He would be dispatched to homes and was good at what he did and was described as a skilled technician and was the appliance company's troubleshooter. For extra money on the weekends, Permon would load up in his 1979 cream and brown Ford van and do appliance repair side jobs in the local area. That is where our story begins. On Saturday, May 22, 1982, Permon Gilbert left his home at about 8:30 a.m. He told his wife that he had to run some errands and apparently had 3 service calls to make as well. She said that he told her that he didn't want to go that morning, but he didn't say why. Permon told her that he'd be back around 3 p.m. and walked out the door. From what we now know, Permon Gilbert had service calls that morning to Mount Orab, Georgetown, and Aberdeen, all towns that were close to Hamersville. These house calls were completed. After his calls were done, Permon drove a few miles, crossing the Simon Kenton Bridge to enter Maysville, Kentucky. While there, he stopped at Clyde's, a large market and variety store. The cashier, Ann Breeze, would recount her interaction with Permon that Saturday. She said that it was casual and friendly and that Permon seemed to be in good spirits. He asked her if she would have lunch with him, as he often would do jokingly. She declined. After his purchase at Clyde's, he would walk over to the adjoining flower shop. He asked the woman on duty, Donna Phipps, specifically about another employee that worked there. Phipps told him that the woman wasn't working then, but that she would be in at 4 p.m. Then she asked him if she could help him with something. He declined and said that he wanted to order some flowers, and that this worker he was asking about knew what he wanted. He said that he would come back later when she was working. Permon had purchased cigarettes while at Clyde's, and the receipt documenting that was printed at 1:06 p.m. on Saturday, May 22nd. That was the last verifiable proof of where Permon Gilbert was and when. As to where Permon Gilbert went after he left Clyde's, that is still unknown more than 40 years later. Back in Hamersville, Joanne Gilbert was starting to worry about her husband. He told her that he'd be back around 3 p.m., but that time came and went. Then it got dark and then late in the night, and he still hadn't returned. She had a young daughter and didn't want to load her up in the car to drive around and look for her husband. Desperately worried, about 3 a.m. on Sunday morning, she phoned a friend of theirs to inquire as to whether they had seen Permon, but they had not. On Sunday morning, Permon Gilbert was officially reported missing by his wife. Police then started their investigation. Then, on that very same day, around 6 p.m., a 15-year-old boy was on a riding lawnmower when he came across a body. It was a man who was naked and in a ditch. He had apparently suffered gunshot wounds. It didn't take long to identify the murdered man, given the police report that had been filed earlier that day. Permon Gilbert had now been found. Permon would be found on Swope Road near his hometown of Bethel and about 7 miles from his home in Hamersville. One of Permon's best friends, Charles Armstrong, who referred to Permon as the best friend that he ever had in his life, was one of the people who had to identify his body. In a newspaper article, he talked about how horrible his friend looked the day he was found. In addition to the gunshot wounds, Permon had also been beaten, and his friend noticed a broken nose and 2 badly swollen eyes. The autopsy was performed by Claremont County Coroner Dr. Nick Capurro. It showed that there were no cloth fibers in the bullet wounds, which meant that Permon Gilbert was naked, from at least above the waist, when he was shot. He had been shot with a .38 caliber handgun 3 times in his back and side. He had also been beaten. In addition to his clothes being missing, his belt buckle and wallet, both with the Mason symbols on them, were also missing. The coroner estimated that Permon Gilbert had been dead for just 2 to 10 hours when he was found on late afternoon Sunday. This would put the time of his murder on Sunday morning. This is important because this leaves many hours between his last sighting around 1 p.m. on Saturday and his death Sunday morning. Where was Permon Gilbert from just after 1 p.m. on Saturday to Sunday morning, and why aren't there any reported sightings of him between that time? The next day, Monday, May 24th, about 22 miles away from where his body was found, Permon's locked van would be located. It was off the side of Ebenezer Road near Ellsbury and north of Aberdeen. A witness said that it had been parked there since Saturday night. It had actually been called in to Adams County deputies at 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, but they had trouble finding it based on the directions given. I do want to talk about a vague report of 4 men being seen in a van similar to Permon's around the time that he was missing. It is unclear where the report came from or if it was just a rumor that was circulated. It isn't mentioned much, and when the police were asked, they had never even heard of the claim. However, it is likely that it wasn't Permon who drove his van to the final place where it was found on Ebenezer Road, so there is a possibility that someone could have seen someone other than Permon in the van. The Gilbert family and the entire town of Hamersville was completely in shock and heartbroken over the death of Permon Gilbert. Adding to their grief was the disbelief at how he died. They were trying to reconcile this unbelievable tragedy and trying to figure out who could have wanted to harm him. Permon was very well liked and a staple in this small community, so who could have wanted him dead? More than 500 friends and relatives would fill the Kennedy Stevens Funeral Home in Bethel, Ohio on May 26, 1982, to pay their final respects to Permon Eugene Gilbert. He was only 46 years old and left behind a devoted wife and 4 children. Permon would be described as someone who liked to cut up, but a gentleman and always concerned with others before himself. His death was a great loss not only to his family, but also to the community. I do want to briefly mention that even though the population of Hamersville, Ohio was only around 700 at that time, there would actually be 2 murders within just hours of each other that weekend. In addition to Permon Gilbert, a 41-year-old woman named Patricia Rose was found stabbed to death in her home on Monday morning. It was worth looking into any possible connection because Patricia Rose's home was less than 10 miles from where Permon lived, and it was believed that she was murdered late Sunday night, not long after Permon's body was discovered. However, upon looking further, it doesn't appear that the 2 murders are related. Patricia Rose was in the process of divorcing her husband. There was also little indication of a struggle, which would seem unlikely if she had been found with another man and an altercation happened. Patricia's estranged husband, Harold Rose, would soon after be arrested for the crime and charged with aggravated murder. He was known to be at Patricia Rose's house on Sunday night, which was when she was murdered. Harold Rose would plead guilty to murder on September 17, 1982. In an interesting side note, probably before Harold Rose was arrested, he apparently drank antifreeze or something similar and was rushed to the emergency room. Rose would survive the suicide attempt, but would need dialysis 3 times a week due to extreme kidney damage from the poison that now the state would have to pay for. With Permon now laid to rest, the police's focus was who could have wanted Permon dead. They would learn a few things that had been happening in the weeks and months before the murder that they hope would help further the investigation. As I mentioned, Permon's hobby was flying a small plane that he had partial ownership of and kept on his property. The plane was a passion for Permon, but he would also tell his family and friends that people would sometimes approach him and ask him to use his plane in a way that wasn't exactly legal. Permon was being asked to fly drugs out of Brown County. He was told that it would be a simple job and that it would pay very well. He wasn't just asked once or twice, he was asked repeatedly. In a Cincinnati Post article from September of 1984, it said that he had been approached at least a dozen times from 1973 to 1982 to fly drugs in and out of Brown County. The article also mentioned that according to the police, Permon had testified before a federal grand jury concerning drug trafficking in the past, but they didn't specify exactly when. Permon's father, Giles Gilbert, also told a newspaper reporter that Permon had served on the grand jury about a year before his murder. Just 3 weeks before his murder, Permon was once again approached by 2 men who wanted to lease his plane. They wanted to fly it from Brown County to Miami, Florida. One of these men who asked Permon had been questioned by law enforcement about large-scale drug trafficking in America. This man that was questioned was also an acquaintance of someone very close to Permon Gilbert, and we'll talk about him now. Vernon Gilbert was Permon Gilbert's brother and was 12 years younger than him. The brothers shared a close bond. Let's just say that Vernon Gilbert had some less than stellar contacts, and it is uncertain what all types of activities that he was involved with. In 1982, Vernon lived in California, but shortly before his brother's murder, Vernon was called to testify in a closed-door grand jury meeting in an organized crime case. Vernon would ask his brother to help him by picking him up at the airport on the day of his testimony, but did that request unknowingly put his brother in harm's way. On March 5, 1982, Vernon Gilbert was set to testify. On that day, Permon picked up his brother at the Greater Cincinnati Airport and accompanied him to the Hamilton County Courthouse. The grand jury hearing was closed to the public, so Permon would stay around the courthouse and wait for his brother to finish. Permon would also tell some family members afterwards that he thought a large man was following him around the courthouse that day and that he couldn't lose him. So since Vernon Gilbert had just testified a few months before the murder, police developed a possible theory that Permon Gilbert's death could have been a message to his brother Vernon. They theorized that it could have been retribution for Vernon testifying for the grand jury. The fact that Permon told some friends and family members about being followed the day of the grand jury testimony could bolster that theory. Or they also said that perhaps Permon Gilbert's murder was their attempt to lure Vernon back to the area for his brother's funeral, and then they would confront him. If that was the reason, it was unsuccessful, because for whatever reason, it was said that Vernon Gilbert did not attend his brother's funeral. Another theory that police had involved all the requests Permon Gilbert apparently had to run drugs or lease his plane to do it from various people. Perhaps the murder was a retaliation for turning them down. I'm unsure if this really happened, but in the Unsolved Mysteries segment, the actor that portrayed Permon told the men that if they didn't stop bothering him about using his plane, then he would call the police. If that threat from Permon was accurate, that could have been a possible motive to silence him. I also want to mention an interview that Permon's sister Charlotte Earhart did with the Cincinnati Enquirer 3 years after her brother's murder. She said that her brother visited her on Thursday, just a few days before his murder, and he wasn't himself. She said that something was on his mind, and clearly it was bothering him. It upset her because he usually wasn't one to show his problems and was always concerned with others. Earhart went on to say that she believes when the murder is solved, it will involve several people, and it will be a shocking thing when it comes out. Permon's daughter Joni would also post a comment on the official Unsolved Mysteries website that in the week before his murder, Permon told his sister that he saw something that he should have not seen. She also mentioned a very well-known family in Hamersville when talking about her father's murder and would like to know if they know more about her father's death than they have admitted to. Often when you see multiple newspapers printing articles about the same case around the same time, you'll hear a different story, and it's not clear which one is correct. That is the case in a few details that may be important in this case, so I wanted to let you know the different accounts, because honestly, I don't know which one is correct. In an article from the Cincinnati Post on June 30th, 1982, it said that inside Permon's van was a money clip containing several $100s as well as expensive work tools. That article also said that Permon Gilbert received a phone call from a man in Adams County before he left his home that last morning, but no other details were given. Then in a Cincinnati Enquirer article from around the same time, it said that the only money found in Permon's van were 2 old silver dollars in a tool tray. They said that his personal wallet and watch were found at home, but that his work wallet that contained his driver's license and payments for appliance repairs was missing. Also, regarding the watch, that article stated that it was found at home, but in the Unsolved Mysteries segment, they specifically say that his watch was found hanging on the gear shift of his van. Another working theory in Permon Gilbert's death was of a much more suggestive nature. Given that Permon's job involved entering people's homes during the day, the authorities had to investigate whether he may have been having an affair, perhaps with someone whose home he had entered for a work call. The fact that Permon Gilbert was found nude could indicate a crime of passion, where perhaps he was discovered with someone, and he paid for the indiscretion with his life. I will say that no one who knew Permon Gilbert bought into that particular theory, and were adamant that he was a devoted husband and voiced that these sordid actions were not in his character. Then in 1988, 6 years after the murder, and frustrated that her father's murder had not been solved, Permon Gilbert's daughter Gina would reach out to the television show Unsolved Mysteries in hopes that the show would air her father's case. The show did agree and even scheduled it to air during Sweeps Week. They would carefully lay out this complex case and would interview Permon's wife and a daughter, as well as a few of the employees at Clyde's who spoke to him right before he disappeared. A real estate salesman from nearby Bridgetown named Joseph Zinnius would be hired to portray Permon. Permon's wife Joanne Gilbert would be interviewed for the show, and in a newspaper interview around the time the case aired, she said that she no longer gets calls from the police, so they decided to try this. She said that she believes her husband was the victim of a drug-related mistaken identity slaying. She said that he owned one half of an airplane just as a hobby. He had been asked to haul drugs, but that was a flat no to that, but it might have got too hot. She also said that she thinks that people who know details are scared. They might call California, meaning the telecenter, and say something anonymously that they wouldn't tell the police. She ended the interview by saying, "I just hope it helps. This is the last resort. I'd like to get it over with." The Unsolved Mysteries segment would air on February 22nd, 1989. It was, in my opinion, one of the more memorable segments of the show. Claremont County Sergeant Dennis Steeman said the segment produced about 800 calls. However, in the end, it doesn't appear that its airing helped to further the investigation. It does continue to play on streaming services to this day, and getting more attention to this case can only help. This really is a unique and baffling case. Permon Gilbert was reported missing in Brown County. He was last seen in Mason County, Kentucky. His body was found in Claremont County, and his van was found in Adams County. Was there a particular reason to leave Permon's body in one county and dump his van in another? Plus, it is stated that Permon Gilbert's body was dumped in a place that it was certain to be found. Sadly, the Gilbert family would endure yet another tragedy. In 2000, his only son, Permon Carl Gilbert Jr., would die from an illness. He was only 45, very near the age his father was at his death. Then in 2012, Joanne Gilbert would die at the age of 75. She would be laid to rest next to her beloved husband, but unfortunately, she lived the last 30 years of her life grieving her husband and trying to find the answers of who killed him and why. Permon's 3 daughters survive, and they are still seeking answers for their father's tragic death. Police will, of course, follow any leads that are called into them concerning Permon Gilbert's murder. They continue to test materials gathered at the time of the murder with the newest technology. We did reach out to the Claremont County Police Department to request more information on this case, as in the police report or photos, or to have our specific questions answered. They were responsive to us, which we are grateful for, and we are still waiting to hear back what they may be able to provide. We weren't given a time frame of how long the wait would be, so we decided to get this podcast out there as soon as possible. If we do receive additional information, we will let you know. Now joining me on the podcast once again is my friend Clinton Daniel. We've both been working on the research part of this podcast for at least a month. There's so much to go over. So both of us have watched this segment for many years on Unsolved Mysteries. What were your thoughts about it then?
My thought about it then, I felt bad for his family. I felt bad for his his wife. But it just really stood out to me that he was found nude and in a ditch. So those were the impressions that I was left with.
Yeah, it was surprising when she said that he was beat on and he was, just so many different things about that crime scene.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the 3 major theories that police have on this case. First, the theory that it was related to the request to use Permon's plane, which he turned down. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, there's something to that. I think it's interesting that he has a plane to start off. I think that's pretty expensive endeavor to have. So I could kind of see a scenario where maybe he told her no, but maybe he was doing it and just putting the money to the side.
Yeah.
yeah, I could see something like that.
Yeah, that's true. We don't even know. I mean, he told his family he wasn't doing it, but if he was doing it, he wouldn't be telling his family.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But then, I mean, that seems like overkill. If he's constantly turning them down, they're going to beat him and shoot him and leave him naked in a ditch for saying no. That doesn't seem right.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. That's, I think if we're talking about drugs, I always think of, well, I mean, I think of like local gangs and stuff, but I just can't see a scenario where they would strip a 46-year-old male. I mean, what purpose would they have to do that? And Joanne, her theory was that it was supposed to bring shame to the family, but that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. So, second is the theory that it was some sort of retribution for his brother Vernon testifying before the grand jury.
Yeah, yeah. Something that stands with me is that Vernon did not go to the funeral, and that has always bothered me for years. Just why didn't he go? But when I start to think about it, Vernon, I feel like they kind of maybe overplayed it, that that Permon was, this overbearing brother that was, always there for Vernon. I just kind of feel like a lot of that was cinematic,
Yeah.
unsolved mysteries. But again, why would they have followed him throughout his route that day? Why would they have just done it when he was readily available? Why would you go all the way to Kentucky, back to Ohio? And then the most obvious is, if you're trying to keep someone quiet that's testifying in a closed door federal hearing, why don't you take him out instead of the brother? That just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly, because it could be drug traffickers. There's even mention that he had mafia ties, and you're going to kill your brother to punish you? No, they're just going to kill him, and they wouldn't have to try to lure him to the area. They would be able to find out where he was, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and even if they weren't, we know, he, of course, he had roots in Ohio, so I'm sure he had family other than his other brothers. So why would they have taken the guy that was traveling in his van on work that day? Why wouldn't they have gone for an easier target? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and it might surprise the listeners to know that we actually called Vernon Gilbert just, a few weeks ago.
Yep, I texted him this week too, and he read the text message, but
So he's still alive and well. We think we know what state, but we won't mention it. But, I mean, he was polite. He just said he did not want to talk about it. And we kind of pushed a little bit and asked, well, we were just trying to help with his brother's case. And then he just simply hung the phone up. So
yeah. I had just always kind of thought that maybe he had passed away. So I was pretty surprised to see that he was still out there, and he seems to be in pretty good health for his age. So
yeah. I do want to mention the third theory is the crime of passion, and that Permon was possibly having an affair.
Yeah.
This one has the most weight to it, I think.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, not to, malign someone that's not here. It's just the nature of his job in and out of women's homes. And there was an old topics forum that mentioned a name of a person that they believe that he asked for that day at the flower shop. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say the entire name, but let's just say this person said her name, she went by Sue.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's the same woman, but there was a woman with that name that, was born and passed away in Maysville.
Yeah.
So that's
the most obvious. That just looks like the most obvious theory to me. And I feel like, Joanne talked about in the segment how that was supposed to be swift, and how does she not know it was a swift death? She says they beat around on him, but I mean that doesn't mean that it took 10 hours.
Yeah.
I think she's really, she has at the time, 4 children, and I think she was probably concerned about his image, maybe more than what she should have been.
Yeah.
And I think those theories are what the family does not want to believe, but it just makes the most sense.
I mean, I understand Joanne's reasons for saying that, even if she knew otherwise. I totally understand, because your husband is gone, and you don't want to think the worst, and definitely you're protecting your children.
Yeah.
And we've also
and that's a hard thing to make. You can't really make amends to something like that. She's passed away, so that's just a hard thing.
Yeah,
and survive with.
We've heard some rumblings about the Masons, and that's just simply because his wallet and belt buckle with the Mason symbol weren't found. And it's just kind of one of the theories I wanted to mention.
And there were active Masons in that area. There's a lot of areas where they have, Masonic lodges, and his area was one. So does that mean anything? I don't think so.
Yeah. And so I mentioned that you had the idea to start the Facebook page, and we have had some people comment. Is there anything noteworthy that you found out so far on there that you want to talk about?
I've been lucky to I've had the opportunity to speak to a few different people who have given me some background information that's been pretty helpful as far as, trying to get the idea for what was really going on in 1982. I've had a couple people that have came forth and said, hey, this is what we were told. And of course, when someone does that, I always keep, the information, their information anonymous. So with that Facebook page, I think that it's a project. It's going to continue. And we've been really lucky as far as when I first set it up, I targeted ads, in that area that he was from within like a 15-20 mile radius. Mm-hmm. So people that would actually see the site actually turned out to be people that knew him, or even his family, we have a couple that had related to him. So I'm pretty hopeful that that's going to be something that's going to keep this case active. Yeah.
Well, Clinton, thank you so much for joining me once again on this podcast. You will be joining me for the next one, and it's going to have a lot of interesting things to go over.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks.
Permon Gilbert has now been gone almost as many years as he was on this earth. Let's not let the shadow that his violent death casts diminish this kind and loving person that he was during his life. This podcast episode was made to not only tell the tragic and complicated story of Permon Gilbert's murder, but to do whatever we could to help get answers and hopefully justice for his family and friends that remain. It is the hope that one day the pieces of this puzzle will all fit together, and that we will know whether his murder was a result of retribution or rendezvous. As I finished writing this podcast, Clinton and I received a pleasant surprise. Claremont County Police Department honored our FOIA request and sent us over 170 pages of the police file. A portion of it is redacted, which is certainly understandable. They also sent us several photographs. We are grateful to them for sending all that they did. I believe that putting even more information out there can only help his case. Maybe all of these years later, some people are now willing to talk. So stay tuned to our next podcast, which will be part 2, the police file. We are still combing through it, and it is a lot to process. I won't say too much yet, but if you think that what Unsolved Mysteries told us was the whole story, you have no idea. So that concludes my podcast on Permon Gilbert. If you have an interest in this episode, you'll want to tune in for the next one for our analysis of the police file. Once again, a special thanks to my friend Clinton Daniel for his help on the continuing research and discussing this case with me. Also, please check out and follow our Facebook page titled Permon Gilbert, What Happened to Me in 1982. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or review where you listen to your podcast. As always, you can find me on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and YouTube Music. Be sure to subscribe so you can get notified of when my new episodes are released. You can find all of my original articles, as well as links to my most recent podcasts, on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. I have a Patreon channel where I post exclusive podcasts on lesser-known missing persons cases that you should check out. I also have social media accounts under Lost and Found Blogs on Facebook, X, and Twitter. You can reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.